Hey everyone, Connor from the World Divide, talking to you today about a March 2nd, 2023 update of the situation in the Russo-Ukraine war. I haven't given an update in quite a long time. I've been very busy and also procrastinating quite a lot. I hope to do a little bit less of that going forward. But anyways, the situation on the ground. So the focus for the past many months, I'd say 7, 8 months, has been the large town of Bakhmut. It's where the largest battle, pretty much in the entire war, it has been taking place. Um, and we had reached a point, probably early this year, where things had kind of gotten to a stalemate for quite a while. Lines were relatively static. You had that small scale offensive in Orikhiv down in the Zaporozhye region. A little bit after that, had some failed assaults on Ugledar by Russian forces, which likely caused them heavy losses by attempting to do that. And now they're resuming their offensive towards that direction. Ugledar is an extremely important stronghold. It is pretty much placed at the southeastern corner of the front line. If you can imagine, the front line is shaped like a C hook. Ugledar is the linchpin in the corner that holds the entire Donbass region together. So if the Russian forces are able to take the stronghold of Ugledar, it will allow them to roll up that front line in places that have been difficult to capture before, like Marinka, will be a hell of a lot easier to capture. And a lot of territory will automatically collapse because of the capture of Ugledar. Um, Russian forces have also resumed offensive actions west of Crimea. Um, they're trying to get better defensive positions along the Oskol River. The progress is slow, but they are advancing. They're advancing bit by bit. Um, and I think their goal in the somewhat near future will be to take Kupiansk, which is a territory that they held before the Kharkiv offensive um, last fall by the Ukrainians. I want to talk about Bakhmut last, so I'm just going to be bouncing around to a bunch of different areas. Along Belarus, so there was a strike on the airport, military airfield, right around Minsk in Belarus, basically the capital, and that was targeting an A-50 Russian plane, which is a radar plane. Russia doesn't have many of these, but basically what this plane does is whenever Russia launches drone strikes, missile attacks, this plane takes off and it analyzes air defense positions and, important ammo depots, all these different things to identify targets so the Russians can better gauge how to further breach Ukrainian air defense. And the Ukrainians had claimed that this aircraft was destroyed. Later, there was footage of this very aircraft completely undamaged. So it must have been kind of a failed sabotage operation by the Ukrainians. But it's interesting to note, later on, President Lukashenko actually met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. They talked about security collaboration. They talked about trying to end the war. And it's under my belief that Belarus may enter the war in some way in the near future. They're fully mobilizing their population. It's more of a silent mobilization. They're calling it a CTO, a counter-terrorist operation. There's a lot of Russian equipment moving around on the borders with Ukraine. And that region of Ukraine, up kind of in the northwestern regions, southern Belarus, around Gomel, those regions are more heavily forested. So oftentimes, American satellite data will be able to provide real-time footage of exactly where Russian forces are on the ground at any given time. And this information is pretty much live. There's no real delay. Everyone knows what everyone is doing. There is no secret. But if you have forested regions where you can hide your troop forces, hide your movements, it makes it a lot harder to determine what is actually happening there. And that's what we're seeing in southern Belarus. So it's really hard to tell. In the Chernihiv, Sumy regions further east, there's just artillery duels, shelling, things like that. Oh yeah, one more thing to note regarding Belarus. There was a shootout that resulted in a Ukrainian soldier dying, just like a quick shootout confrontation. It's hard to say if that's really going to spark anything, but it is worth noting. In Kharkiv, I believe there will be an offensive on the border of Belgorod, pretty much when Russia decides to finally activate their large-scale offensive. Um, it's already been over a year of war, and a lot of people expected Russia to activate a large-scale offensive on the one-year anniversary of the war. That never happened. Basically, what happened was Putin on the 21st of February actually got up and did a speech in front of the Russian people, in front of the Russian parliament, military leaders, um, basically rehashing everything that had happened up to that point. The only notable thing that really happened or came out of that was that Russia has withdrawn from the START nuclear treaties. Now, what are these? These are nuclear treaties that prevent either side from stockpiling nuclear weapons. They prevent either side from. It basically provides some sort of arms control, some sort of regulation between the United States and Russia. With the withdrawal of these treaties, talks between Russia and the United States are done. They've ended. Russia will not talk to the United States anymore. They will likely stockpile their nuclear arsenal. They are on high alert, and they have certain undetectable submarine weapons, particularly with like the Poseidon missiles, some other missile systems that are escaping me at this time, that could wreak absolute havoc. So we should absolutely, as soon as possible, and I've been a spokesman of this, I do not support Ukraine. I do not support Russia. I support the war to end because there are good reasons for both sides to be doing what they're doing. But I believe that the current government within Ukraine is extremely toxic. I believe that it is a non-democratic government, just like the Russian government. But the difference is Vladimir Putin, at least, even if the systems are corrupt, the people behind him support him. The people behind him believe that he can save Russia, and they might actually be right. They might be right. He is probably the only viable candidate at this moment to lead the Russian people and to prevent NATO from disassembling and destroying Russia, which is pretty much our goal at this point. Even though Joe Biden recently made a speech saying that our goal is not to destroy Russia, not to destroy the Russian people. Nothing our governments in the United States, the governments in Europe, nothing they say is true. They've always said things, and then their actions have reflected otherwise. They've always gone about and done the opposite. So sometimes when a leader, whether it be in NATO, in the United States, in the EU, states that they do not intend to do something, sometimes that is a preconditioned notion to expect them to do that exact thing that they're saying they're not going to do. Anyways, off this little tangent, this ramble, let's talk about China. So there have been some recent moves by China. There's been spy balloons found pretty much all over the world, shot down over North Carolina. China is clearly starting to consider heavier involvement in the Russo-Ukraine war, and tensions between China and the United States are at pretty much a new low at this point. Now, China, while it's in their best interest for Russia to win the war, it's in their best interest for their closest ally and northern flank to be completely secure. So, China and Russia are doubling down on their strategic partnership. And now China is, and this is big news, considering to provide lethal aid to Russia. If things continue the way they are going, this will end up happening, and this war will escalate. Speaking of escalation, where better for the war to escalate than Moldova? Now, the Moldovan government has collapsed in recent days. The government was replaced. The government was always seen as kind of fragile. It was never really a particularly stable government in the first place. And that has a lot to do with Russian interference, as well as a bit of interference from NATO in the West as well. But talking about the breakaway region in the East, Transnistria. Now, after the withdrawal of Russian forces on the west bank of the Dnieper River, basically when they occupied the city of Kherson, and they occupied a large swath of territory on that western side of the bank, once Russian troops realized that they were heavily overstretched, heavily undercommitted to the war, and they had to reconsolidate under the commander Surovikin. You saw that withdrawal of Kherson. You saw the withdrawal in the Kharkiv region. Not much resistance was offered, with the exception of around the town of Liman. And that was necessary for Russian forces to be able to reorganize, and this is where we stand now, at this kind of stalemate, slow crawl, grinding war of attrition. But ever since that happened, Transnistria came under threat, because no longer was the possibility of Russia swooping in and connecting that land bridge to Transnistria going to happen. And there's been a lot of talk within the Moldovan government that may be the best solution, because we want to integrate with the EU, we want to integrate with NATO, is to take over Transnistria. The problem with that is there are a lot of supporters within Transnistria that actually support Russia. The majority of them do. Their population is being mobilized because they feel an imminent threat. In Moldova, there's a lot of pro-Russian sentiment as well. And I believe there's a lot of spies, there's a lot of supporters within Moldova, genuine supporters, as well as espionage in Moldova, designed to keep the government fragile, and designed, in a worst-case scenario, in a coup d'etat, overthrow the Moldovan government. Now, if this happens, would Ukraine get involved? Likely. They likely would. Moldova is a much smaller country. Ukraine has a much bigger military. Let's remember that Ukraine and Russia have the largest militaries in all of Europe. They have the largest percentage of their population willing to fight for their country, including other countries like Poland and Finland, Ukraine and Russia. So this is truly a massive war. This is a massive war on a scale we haven't seen since World War II. And it's easy to just look at the news. It's easy to just look at what's happening and to think that, just to think about the bigger, the casualty numbers, the statistics, the movements on the map. These are people's lives. These are soldiers that are being shelled day in, day out, living in muddy trenches filled with water, disease, shelling, firefights. This is a brutal war. Combined arms, drone, armored, aerial warfare. This is a type of war we have never seen before. before. This is a war representative of what 21st century warfare is like. So, Transnistria may be invaded by Ukraine with the permission of the Moldovan government, because if Ukraine decides to invade Transnistria without Moldovan approval, that doesn't really look good for their brand. It doesn't look good for their PR. And Ukraine has survived up to this point because of their PR, because they have been able to rally Western support, and they have been able to continue the narrative. And as long as they're able to continue that narrative, they can maintain Western support, which is now including tanks, which is now including fighter jets from some countries. The worry here is that this is escalatory. This is bringing us to a point we don't have dialogue between Russia and the United States. And quickly, soon enough, we won't have dialogue between China and the United States. Quickly, all of our adversaries that we have continually bullied, that we have continually undermined, lied to, will unite against us. There's only so many times that you can beat a country into submission. There's only so many times that you can overthrow governments. So many times that you can change the picture around the world in your favor and not build up enough enemies to stop you. And for 70 years, we have been the sole power on the planet. But that world's changing. In fact, that world is likely over. We're entering a world of multipolarity. So all these chess pieces are starting to fall in place. Transnistria may be one of them. Who knows? We might see an action by March 15th. Why do I say that? Airlines, commercial airlines, have made a decision to close off any commercial flights over Moldovan airspace beginning on March 15th. What is this an indicator of? Well, right before the Ukraine war kicked off, airspace completely controlled, closed to commercial traffic. No flights, anything. We're going over Ukraine. This is a good indicator that something will happen on March 15th. Mark my words. If it doesn't, and I hope it doesn't, thank God. But if it does, keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for the region of Transnistria, because it's very important. Russia's going to defend it like it's its own territory. Which means, worst comes to worst, looking on a map, Transnistria is a thin little strip of country. It's not very easy to defend. The Ukrainian armed forces certainly have the upper hand. What are the Russians to do? I hope nuclear weapons are out of the question, but if Transnistria were to completely collapse, that might be the only option the Russians have. So, let's hope that doesn't happen. But now the final topic I want to talk about today. Bakhmut. Bakhmut is now in a cauldron. It is encircled. The last two veins, those last two roads leading out of Bakhmut, are under physical fire control. They can be seen. They're hundreds of meters away from Russian troops. And we're in a situation where Bakhmut is critical. It may collapse today. It may collapse tomorrow. But there have been rumors that there's been a mutiny among Ukrainian soldiers. That they're refusing orders. And now at this point, I'm waiting for a bit of information from the Ukrainian side. I'm waiting for the Ukrainian High Command to announce that they are sending reinforcements for a counteroffensive in Bakhmut. It is at that point that I'll know Bakhmut has fallen. Because those forces are not designed to start a counteroffensive. Those forces are designed to try to save as many lives as possible rather than create a hastily designed defensive position to prevent Russian forces from breaking further along the lines. Now, what are the Ukrainian options? Well, they need to dig in Chasiv Yar, the command post pretty much for the northern Donbass region for many, many months. It's on the high ground above Bakhmut. It's better fortified. But Chasiv Yar is already starting to be encircled a little bit from the south. It won't take a hugely long time for it to be encircled from the north as well. So the Ukrainians are in a tough position. They need to fortify the line along Konstantinivka, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk. They need time. Bakhmut is buying them time. But is the cost worth it? This is the largest battle in the entire war in Ukraine. We're talking over 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers committed to this battle. That is massive. It is hell in Bakhmut. It is hell. So we're going to watch this situation very closely, and we're going to see what happens. But it looks like Russian forces are going to take Bakhmut. What happens from here? What happens with Transnistria? What happens if China? Will they provide lethal aid to Ukraine? Obviously on the Russian side. Will Iran up their drone production to Russia? Offer further support? Who knows? This war has been completely unpredictable. Military analysts who can claim to know what is going to happen are talking total bullshit. I don't know I have no idea what's going to happen. I just take all the information I have from Ukrainian sources, from Russian sources, from satellite data, cross-referencing everything, and I come up with my own projections, also based off of other analysts' projections. And I'm just doing my best to try to bring you the most accurate, clear-cut information possible. And that is the goal of this channel. If you have a counter-argument, hell, if you want to criticize me, constructive criticism is highly encouraged. Please criticize me. It'll make me a better intellectual. It'll make me be able to provide better information to you guys. Thank you very much. I should be releasing more videos soon. Take care.